All right, welcome everyone. It's so nice to have you here today. Let's get I wanted to give everybody just a chance to join, but we'll be recording this and sending it out to anyone who is not here with us as we get started. So let's go ahead and dive in. Hello, everyone. I'm Juliet Steiner. I'm Associate Vice President of Strategic Content Operations and SME Services at Lumina Datamatics. We appreciate you all being with us today to explore implementing DEI reads in content workflows. Before we get started, I'll share a little bit about me. After receiving my master's degree in English from the University of Missouri, I began my professional academic publishing career. My focus has always been in content as an editor, content developer, and learning designer, most often helping to deliver high-quality manuscripts that supported outcomes-based learning, and then in management and leadership roles. I am passionate about creating high-quality content that is welcoming to all, content that can be accessed, engaged with, and mastered successfully by any learner or user to achieve their personal, educational, or professional goals. For those not familiar with Lumina Datamatics, we're a strategic partner in providing content, analytics, and technology solutions to publishers and content providers around the globe. Our clients benefit from reduced time to market for new products and services, optimized business processes, operational efficiencies, and improved competitiveness. Lumina Datamatics expert solutions are powered by a number of innovative proprietary platforms and more than 3,500 talented employees across Germany, India, the UK, Philippines, and the United States, which is where I'm located. Renee, my co-presenter, could you please share a little bit about yourself now?
Sure, of course. Thanks, Juliet. I'm so excited to be here with you and all of our viewers and folks who will view later. My name is Renee Harleston. I'm a sensitivity reader and founder of Writing Diversely. We provide sensitivity reads and manuscript editing for writers and content creators. I've always been a lover of history, people, culture, and the ways that history and culture matter to how we live today. So after graduating with my master's in anthropology, I worked a lot in history education for museums and nonprofits. And I've been a sensitivity reader for over 7 years. And I started Writing Diversely about 5 years ago when I saw that my clients were making sort of similar mistakes over and over again, which to me signaled that there was sort of a collective need for education on the topics of inclusive writing and cultural authenticity. So I've worked on projects across the publishing spectrum, from magazine articles, novels, picture books, games, all the way to textbooks in history, technology, and medicine.
Thank you so much. That was great, Renee. So for everyone who's joined us, as we get started, throughout this discussion, if you have any questions, please go ahead and type them in the Q&A at any time. We'll be sure to get to those at the end of our discussion. And so now that you know a little bit about who we are, why don't we talk about what DEI is? Renee, how would you like to start us off, please?
Sure, absolutely. So a lot of us have seen this acronym DEI or DEIB or some version of that, which means diversity, equity, inclusion, and if you're adding the B, that means belonging. And we've started to see that a lot over the last decade or so. So to me, DEIB means a couple of things. It's a conscious acknowledgement that there has been some historical and modern issues in workplaces and communities all across the world related to marginalized people being excluded, undervalued, or discriminated against intentionally or otherwise. And when I say historically marginalized, this is what I mean by that phrase, right? It's a population that has historically and systematically been denied access to services, resources, and power relationships, which has resulted in poor outcomes across the spectrum. They are often identified based on their race, ethnicity, socioeconomic status, geography, religion, language, sexual identity, and disability status. I'd like to add that this is, not necessarily the full spectrum of who's included in historically marginalized, but it is primarily who would be included in that phrase, right? But DEIB also means because these issues have been acknowledged, now organizations are proactively and earnestly thinking about how they can address, educate, and rectify, or maybe even prevent some of these missteps that have been identified in the future, right? Which is where someone like I will come in and help out. So in the content creation world, DEI is similar, but slightly different for writing content, and especially nonfiction and academic content. DEI for content acknowledges that in the past, historically marginalized voices have been left out of the research, writing, editing, and publishing of content. And when I say sort of historically marginalized in this context, I mean, it's referring to, but not exclusively limited to LGBTQIA plus, Native people, people of color, gender diversity, and people with disabilities, and ethnic, cultural, and religious minorities. And that's where readers like I kind of hone in. Oftentimes the content being published is specifically about these historically marginalized groups and their history. For example, the war on drugs, or the content could be about immigration or giving birth. But the historically marginalized folks that this content is about are often left out of all of the aspects of writing and the publishing process, right? So bringing in readers like myself, my role is to understand this historic erasure in the text and the research, and to keep the humanity of marginalized subjects and readers in mind as I provide feedback and suggestions on how to bring more inclusive language and points of view to the content as much as possible, right? So this could be as simple as updating a specific word choices to be more contemporary of how marginalized folks refer to themselves, all the way to larger themes to address. So, for example, suggesting that an author consider including physical disabilities in a textbook that broadly addresses disabilities, right? So helping them be more specific about the spectrum of disabilities they can bring to that text.
Thank you so much, Renee. That was really helpful, and hopefully everybody got a great introduction there. So with that, now let's kind of look at how this can be incorporated into content. And in just a bit, we're going to go into some more detail about why you should consider adding this to your workflow. So while DEI reads are becoming more common in educational content, they are still fairly new. However, sensitivity reads, which were most commonly applied to fiction or nonfiction or mass market books, has been around for a while. So we're going to go on a journey here together, everyone. Imagine you are writing a thrilling new crime novel. You are a straight white middle-aged woman, and you have a husband and no children. Now, in this exciting story that you're putting out there, your main character is a Black man who grew up in Lagos, Nigeria. He's a skilled detective, and he has a sidekick who's a lesbian medical student from the UK. Sounds exciting, right? Well, as you're working on this, you might want to bring in a medical expert, such as a doctor, to ensure all of your medical information is factual and technically correct. Because you wouldn't want a healthcare professional reading your book to laugh at you for totally botching your use of medical language and procedure, especially when it's key to the plot. But also, you don't know what it's like to be a Black man who grew up in Africa. So you might hire a sensitivity reader who comes from that background, who has experienced that perspective, and ask for feedback on how to make that character believable and realistic, to vet and validate your language and cultural choices. And you might also ask for help avoiding biased or stereotypical language or harmful representations. But really, why do this? Well, okay, you don't want to put something out there that offends or harms the very people you want to enjoy your book. And you don't want to look foolish to readers who know you clearly don't know what you're talking about based on the language choices you use. And additionally, because your publisher is investing a lot of resources in publishing your manuscript, and they want a return on their investment. And content that gets negative publicity because of biased or racist or offensive representations just may not generate profit. So sensitivity reads bring on individuals with that lived experience to help ensure that content is an authentic representation of that experience, that language is appropriate to a culture, and unintentionally offensive representations are avoided, because it all takes away some of that risk that comes with putting content out to market. And DEI reads are similar to these sensitivity reads, but we're talking about them involving educational or professional content, such as textbooks or reference guides, online courses, training videos, that kind of thing. Probably a lot of the content folks on this call are busy putting out every day. So rather than have for several people with lived experiences involved in putting out like a new new psychology textbook, which would probably need a lot of different perspectives due to the nature of the content, DEI reads for this kind of content often involves just one reader. You can think of them kind of as a super reader who's looking at content from a very broad range of historically underrepresented perspectives. So DEI readers are well-versed in commonly used inclusivity guidelines and current thinking around representation and equity and belonging. And they're going to know things like the Associated Press or APA latest language usage guidelines. And they're going to go in and review content and identify areas where language could be made more inclusive, where implicit or unconscious bias is getting in the way of learners or users interacting with that content. And then they're going to provide feedback on why specific research or data could be refreshed or reevaluated to include maybe more current examples that reflect a wider range of researchers, demographics, or even data points. So sensitivity readers, regardless of whether they're working on a work of fiction or educational or professional content, they use their reviews as an opportunity to broaden the thinking of the author or the publisher. And good sensitivity readers don't tell you what is wrong. They discuss why information presented in potentially a different way might be more accessible to a wider audience. And they're going to provide suggestions and recommendations, recognizing that any author or content producer could be really at any stage of the DEI spectrum, from all in and completely excited for the support on their manuscript to 100% resistant and philosophically opposed to DEI. So the sensitivity reader's purpose really is to identify opportunities for improvement and help others see the benefit of those recommended changes. Now, I've been talking for a while here now, and we really wanted to pause and take a poll. So I'm going to ask my colleagues off screen to go ahead and put up our first poll. Let's see, I do not see it. Are we ready for that poll? If not, we can go ahead and just keep moving. All right, I do not see it, so perhaps they're having some technical difficulties. So Renee, we're just going to kind of keep moving on, and we'll come back to that poll potentially later at the end if that works out for everyone. So now that I've kind of shared what a sensitivity read is, can you tell us a little bit more about who sensitivity readers are?
Yeah, absolutely. So, when I started writing diversely 5 years ago, we were kind of, a disaggregate group of folks. And I've luckily been able to reach out and work with a lot of sensitivity readers from a lot of different places in the United States and abroad. And there's a few, sort of commonalities in our stories, right, of how one becomes qualified to perform a DEI read or become a sensitivity reader. So it's really important to know that there is no sort of certificate course or degree that lends you to be an expert reader or a sensitivity reader, right? There's no sort of accreditation for this. There are professional publishing and editing organizations that have some classes and resources for its members about the subject. So there is, some great information out there and some courses to take for folks. And my path, like many others, really involved a little bit of preparation and a little bit of luck. 7 years ago, I didn't really know this term sensitivity reader before, but I was talking to a really good friend of mine who was working in the publishing industry, and we were talking about a book that we had both read, and she's a white woman and I'm a Black woman, and we were sort of noticing and commenting how the Black character in the book just didn't really seem authentic to me. It was really pulling me out of the story. It took away a little bit of the enjoyment from me. And she said, hey, I think you should be a sensitivity reader. So we spent a lot of time talking about what that was. And with my background in history and anthropology and my love of reading, it really sort of prepared me to take on that work. And bring in some really great clients across fiction and nonfiction. And most people have started that work sort of organically, like I did, right? A little informally. A lot of folks, were maybe their friends or other people they know have written something and they were asked, hey, you share this identity the same as my character. Do you mind reading it and give me some advice or feedback? Like the example you gave, Julietta, you might go to your doctor friend and say, hey, I wrote this. Can you look at this scene really quick and tell me, did I get this right? That's one sort of organic way that folks become sensitivity readers. And a lot of sensitivity readers also have years of experience and knowledge being editors in other aspects, right? They could be proofreaders or developmental editors or even writers themselves. A lot of folks I work with are former English teachers, right? So they have some of that professional or education background that also lends itself to doing some of this work, right? And it is a natural extension of their services. And I work exclusively with folks who self-identify as belonging to a marginalized identity, because that lived experience is really of the utmost importance. And like I said, many have educational or professional experience as well. But most importantly to me and a lot of the other readers that I've worked with is everyone sees their role as service work, right? We've all been affected by poorly written representation of our own identities. And we find that, it's important to us to help correct and teach folks who are writing this so that future readers don't have to read bad representation of themselves, right? And of course, sensitivity readers and DEI readers should be really well-versed, reasonably well-versed in the history and culture of the identity that they are a member of, and really dedicated to staying current on changing language and changing perspectives in writing.
That was super helpful, Renee. I really appreciate you sharing so much of that background. Now, I'm curious, I'm sure folks who joined us today are curious as well. Could you talk a little bit about what the feedback looks like that you're providing to your clients?
Sure, absolutely. So I just want to, step back and say, I find that, when I start to work with authors, they tend to be a little bit nervous when they hire a sensitivity reader. Many don't really know what to expect. It might be their first time, or they're afraid that when we give their feedback, it might be accusing them of being some sort of awful person. Like, I can't believe you wrote this. What kind of person are you? But no, we're professional editors. We are not here to judge, right? As I said, we see this as service work. So first and foremost, it's important that our feedback be constructive, right? And focus on educating and not on judgments and accusations, right? Our role is not to just point out that something is problematic or wrong or offensive, right? It's important for us to think about what's the next step, right? How do we help fix this change? How do we help educate the author or the publisher and say, hey, this is a thematic issue that I'm noticing. Here's a resource. Maybe you can read a little bit about it. You can talk to me about it, and we can, work together on some revisions, right? When we look at text, we're keeping in mind that it's important to bring voice and humanity and agency to marginalized people as much as possible. And our work does have some, definitive rules, right? For me and all sensitivity readers and expert readers, like the word Black is always capitalized in contemporary language. And when you're talking about a Black person, right? Because there's a difference between describing a Black person and a Black sweater, right? So that's an example, right? Or using language like differently abled is never acceptable when you're talking about disabled people. That is a contemporary change in language that we're moving forward with, right? But we also keep this in context, right? We have to keep in mind that, you know, depending on what we read, that's how we give our feedback. If it's a primary source, you know, we look at that different than the narrator's voice or the author's text. So, you know, when we're giving feedback, you know, your comments will be in the drafted text, just like line editing. We'll highlight specific words and passages that need attention. We provide resources and definitions and suggestions for fixes. And this is all done, like I said, within the context and stated purpose of the text. We also provide feedback on the larger theme. So as I said before, you know, context is extremely important. And while I can't share the specific source material because we keep confidentiality really important, I'll share a little bit about what my feedback looks like back to a writer, right? So in this example, it's an academic book about the health of the urban poor, right? Just sort of writ large, the urban poor in the United States. And this is the feedback I shared with them when they were sort of describing the housing of the urban poor in the United States contemporarily. I said, it's really important not to rely on tropes, on housing conditions to describe the way poor and oppressed people live. While the descriptions are moving, they also perpetuate stereotypes of poverty. Using statistics or anecdotal evidence on subpar housing conditions to give these descriptions authenticity. If you have a direct quote from one of your subjects, it would be helpful to hear about their home in their own words, right? So that's one example. Another example here is from an American history textbook. The textbook is about American chattel slavery, and it uses the term Black, lowercase, slave, and master throughout the author's content, and this is not related to the primary sources, right? So this is my feedback. I said the feedback I gave in the draft are related to outdated language regarding Black, slave, and master. I made suggestions based on inclusive language best practices, which exclude quoted texts from primary sources and take historical context into account. For usage outside of those primary sources, I recommend capitalizing Black in reference to people and updating to enslaved person over slave and the word enslaver rather than slave or master. Although these differences may read awkwardly to us at times because they are relatively new and unpracticed in most academic texts, I've also added notes regarding alternative suggestions to phrasing potentially emotionally triggering content, right? So this is just me telling the author, hey, I've noticed these things in the text. Here are some suggestions for changes. If you'd have looked back at the draft, there were specific highlights of words and notes and resources that I had given the author to make those changes.
Thank you, Renee. I really appreciate that. Hopefully that gives everybody a little bit of an understanding of the kinds of feedback and how it's really, it's intended to be illustrative, informative, and helpful to them. Well, I have word that our polls are working now. So we're going to go ahead and do 2 quick polls. I hope everyone is ready to help us out with some information. So to my friends backstage, if we can put that first poll up. Awesome. Everybody who's joined us today, if you don't mind taking a second to let us know, do you currently use DEI Sensitivity Reads services? This is something we're really interested in. We'll give you a second to go ahead and answer this for us. And then we'll go right into our second poll as soon as this one comes down. All right, are we good with this one? Let's go ahead and put the second poll question back up here. All right, I think it's coming. Thanks everyone for helping us out with that question. And we have our second question, if you don't mind posting that poll here. All right. Oh, look at that. We've got some, I didn't realize we get to see that. This is very interesting. Thank you. And so let's do our second question. We have that one ready to pop up. There we go. So this is for those of you who are doing sensitivity reads currently. We're really curious, are you doing these internally with people on your staff, or do you outsource this to an external service provider? So if you could take a minute and let us know what your experience is, that would be wonderful. All right. And I'm sure we'll get to see the answers to this one as well. That's exciting. I can't wait to see what people have shared with us today. All right, interesting. Okay. Well, thanks everyone for helping us with that information. That's really great. Let's go ahead and keep on going here. So really, we've covered the who and the what and the how, but I think we're at that point where you want to know why. Everything that we've talked about sounds like some extra work and extra cost. And so how do you justify this on a balance sheet? And is there even a return on your time and financial investment? Now, I'm going to acknowledge that in the United States today, there are some very big political and cultural factors at play. And in the last year or so, DEI has become an even more highly charged term. And the discourse around DEI may actually impact whether a particular market for your product is opened up or is closed off. And so we just all have to acknowledge that, but that is a discussion that's outside the scope of this webinar today. What I can do is I can share some of what educational researchers have found about the benefits of incorporating DEI into content. And research shows content that is diverse, equitable, inclusive leads to some really exciting things, such as improved student learning and outcomes, improved critical thinking, increased participation, enhanced engagement, and an improved sense of belonging. So in other words, students or content users see themselves reflected in that. When they see themselves reflected in that content they're using, they not only better connect with the material, but they can better internalize that material as well. And as the US population, and honestly, the global population continues to change and reflect greater demographic diversity, textbooks, courseware, professional learning resources, everything that we all in this room, virtual room, work on, when those better reflect the changes in our demographics, they will be, the products that reflect those changes will be positioned to be more desirable to the users and decision makers. And importantly, when direct to consumer professional learning is happening, individuals have the choice about where to spend their personal money on certifications or skill-based training are going to be more likely to choose resources that acknowledge them, positively reflect their experience, and create a welcoming space, a place where they belong. So that's a little bit on the return on investment with DEI reads, but I'd love to hear what Renee has to say about this from her perspective.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a great point. And I think, to me, this work is really about bringing humanity to the subjects and readers that have been ignored and marginalized for ages. And I think of doing this work a little bit like the curb cut effect, if you've heard of that. So curb cuts are those sort of intentional cutouts on the sidewalk. They dip down to street level, and they were intended really for disabled people to use under the ADA, right? But it's so incredibly helpful to the rest of us, right? Strollers, carts, suitcases, right? This is available for all of us to use, right? And I see our work like that. This is not just about making edits to make marginalized people feel better when they read the text. It also helps educate and prime all people, including non-marginalized people, to sort of unlearn the stereotypes that they've been exposed to in the media and in academic content. So it's really a valuable resource for everyone.
Absolutely. Thank you all. I think that's the end of the comments that we kind of prepared for everyone. And now we wanted to use the rest of our time here today to take a look at the Q&A and answer some questions. And of course, if you have any additional questions, you can go ahead and pop them up right now. So let's see, all right, so we have one question. Do the DEI readers use a standard set of guidelines when conducting DEI reviews, or can the publishers provide their own set of guidelines? Yes, absolutely. It's really up to the client, to the publisher, whoever, to determine what they want their content checked against. At Lumina Datamatics, we have clients who are very passionate about the guidelines that they have prepared that they want us to follow. But we also have clients who come to us and they say, I want DEI read done, but I don't really have, I don't have guidelines. And so then we go ahead and we use our knowledge to apply guidelines. Renee, how would you like to respond to that?
Yeah, I agree. I think, both things happen. I will say that it's also our responsibility as DEI experts to make notes if the actual standards being supplied to us are a little bit off base in our experience, right? Sometimes our clients come in with great guidelines and we don't need to make comments on them, but there have been others that we see that like, actually your guidelines are a little bit outdated. Let us help with that. And we'll also use them in the work that we're doing. So a little bit of both.
Yep, yep, great. We have another question here. This one's a little bit gnarlier to answer, so I'm going to share it out so that people know that this is what everyone's thinking about, and we'll kind of give our thoughts on this. So someone says, I work for a publishing company, and we've seen demos of various AI tools to support accessibility initiatives, such as generation of alt text for images. In many of these cases, non-inclusive language is baked into the training data set and output, i.e. identifying a person with long hair as a woman and a person with short hair as a man. And I'm interested in understanding how we can balance the efficiencies of AI to create accessible content while ensure that we are using inclusive language and acknowledging that this is also an accessibility issue. So I will say, isn't AI a Wild West frontier? And I think that it's only as good as what you put into it. And so I can't speak to what data or tools that this individual is using, but I really think that there is room for AI to be invested in to help support some of these work, especially around alt text. I don't. I again, it's only as good as your language and your training set. And I will say that inclusive language is evolving and changing and growing. And so if you're going to be working either internally or with a provider, you need to have confidence that those your product managers on that product are investing in always updating that language and always training that language, because again, there are some challenges. Renee, is that something you would like to talk about at all?
Yeah, I think it's also important to note AI is it's like you said, it's a bit of the Wild West, but it's also still learning. And because we have an issue with historically marginalized voices, identities, and people being excluded or written about improperly or with bad representation, that is also the content that AI is learning. Right. So that's important to keep in mind, is that what's being inputted is oftentimes not something that I would even recommend be written down. Right. But that being said, there are especially accessibility advantages to AI that we're still sort of learning about. But it's really sort of important to know that there's no sort of like cheat code or fast way that a computer is going to tell you about the lived experience of human beings, right? So that's really important to keep in mind too.
Yeah, absolutely. I do think there's a lot of opportunity for AI or technology to help with certain language pieces, but I don't have confidence today that it's going to get to things that are contextual,
Right.
unconscious bias, that kind of stuff, that is more insidious, difficult to find, but and certainly we've got humans reading content that don't see these things. I don't really know how AI is going to get there. But again, we're at the start of this journey with technology, and it's something that we've been exploring. It's something that we're very interested in because we know that all of this is expensive, and we know that our publishing partners want to get the most bang for their buck. They want to put out the best quality content they can, and they have limited budgets to do so. So I don't know if that answered your question so much as acknowledge that this is something that needs really a lot of care when you're going to be using AI tools to support DEI initiatives or accessibility or inclusivity issues. So with that, that covers all of the questions that I think we had come through for today. However, I just want to make sure that everybody knows that the conversation does not necessarily have to be over. I'm going to share with everybody, give me 1 second, my contact information. So if any of you would like to continue this conversation, or if you have questions, either in general or specific to your work and workflows, please do not hesitate to reach out to me directly. So you can see my email here. Note the D at the end of the Lumina in my email address, and just shoot me an email and we can go ahead and talk through whatever you'd like to talk through. We all appreciate your time today. Thank you so much. And we wish you all the very best through the rest of your day.
Thanks, everyone.
Yeah, thank you. Have a great afternoon, evening, or morning, wherever you are.